Welcome to the good, the bad, and the ugly. Where the mighty have fallen, the good get ugly, and there's no such thing as bad publicity. This time, we chart the miraculous revival of 5 celebrities whose careers appear to be dead in the water. Until 2008, Mickey Rourke looked destined to be remembered more for the roles he turned down than for the ones he accepted. Back in the 1980s, his brooding looks and intense performances in 9.5 Weeks, Barfly and Angel Heart drew comparisons with the likes of James Dean and Marlon Brando. Comparisons that only increased as word spread about his dangerous unpredictability on set. As his star rose, so did his instability. He became famous for walking off shoots and failing to turn up for work, and reportedly rejected a stack of lead roles in films like Beverly Hills Cop, Rain Man, 48 Hours, Highlander, and Platoon. He chose instead to climb back into the boxing ring he'd left to take up acting. Over the next few years, a succession of opponents proceeded to mash Mickey's pretty face to a pulp, and a series of reconstructive operations left him almost unrecognizable from the posters of his early movies. By the mid-90s, he was ready to go back to making movies, but few filmmakers were prepared to take the risk. He ended up featuring in straight-to-video releases and a music video for Enrique Iglesias.
You know, I'd get a part here, a day here, 3 days here, and it wasn't the same as carrying a movie and you know, having people trust me again to have that responsibility, because I was out of control and unaccountable, and you know, I wasn't. I'd lost everybody's faith pretty much when I went haywire, I guess.
Approaching 50, broke, and with only his chihuahuas to keep him company, he finally had to take a long, hard look at himself.
You know, I had a lot of lessons to learn the hard way. You know, my grandmother always said, you know, God has a plan for all of us, and I should have went along with his instead of mine, because my plan sucked. So, you know, the lessons I had to learn the hard way, and I worked hard to change, and change came hard for me, and so, you know, it didn't happen overnight.
For the son of an amateur bodybuilder, it was time to find some humility.
After several years of not being able to get jobs because I couldn't deal with, you know, some dude with an attitude, you know, judging me or talking down to me as I had these things going on in my head that may not even have been happening, I finally learned how to go in and go, hey, how are you, you know? And that was hard, because I had a lot of pride.
That learned geniality helped him through supporting roles in films like Sin City, Domino, and Stormbreaker. But it was going to take a lot more than minding his P's and Q's to persuade producers to back him as a leading man. It was going to take the unwavering faith of director Darren Aronofsky.
I just knew he had the abilities, I knew he had the talent, and from the first moment I met him, I knew there was going to be something special. It's before that. When I saw his work back in the 80s and the early 90s, I knew he was just one of our greatest talents.
The story goes that The Wrestler was originally budgeted at more than $20 million, but no one would fund a film with Mickey in the lead. Darren stuck to his guns and eventually found a cashed-up Mickey Rourke fan who was willing to put up $6 million. Darren changed the script and made the whole film for $6 million. Having compromised so much to get his star, he wasn't about to swallow any prima donna antics. He allegedly sat Mickey down before filming started and demanded he give the best performance of his life. The pressure was on.
It was a combination of going, you know, saying, okay, I'm going to put on 28 pounds of muscle, and then I'm going to go visit some really dark, painful places that aren't particularly fun to go to, and I knew Darren would demand that out of me, and the way he handled it, you know, there was a lot of trust and a lot of respect on both ends, and I was able to give him everything. And
used to slugging it out for real in the boxing ring, he previously looked down his nose at the choreographed pantomime of professional wrestling.
I never really had a whole lot of respect for wrestling until I ended up in the hospital, you know, a whole bunch of times the first couple of months, and just landing the wrong way and, pulling this, breaking this, pinching that. And I went, wow, these guys really get hurt.
In the end, though, the pain was all worthwhile.
As far as I'm concerned, it is the best movie I ever made, and it's the hardest movie I ever made, and it's the most I've ever trusted and respected someone enough to give them all of myself.
That trust was rewarded with Golden Globe and BAFTA awards for Best Actor. He also took out an Independent Spirit Award, which he dedicated to his recently deceased dog, Lockie. One comeback kid who has never fallen foul of the establishment is 7-time Tour de France winner Lance Armstrong. However, over the course of his 20-year cycling career, there have been plenty of attempts to discredit him. Rumours of performance-enhancing drug taking have sat on his back wheel since the early days. But the road racing whiz, who describes himself as the most tested athlete in history, proved as successful at fending off doping allegations as he did at beating his fellow competitors. He was given quite a run for his money in 2005 by French newspaper L'Equipe, which insisted it had proof that samples of Lance's urine collected during the Tour de France in 1999 showed indisputable traces of a banned substance called EPO.
Les premiers documents sont les résultats d'analyses pratiquées.
The first documents are the results of tests carried out by the worldwide known French doping laboratory at Châtenay-Malabry on samples taken between 1999 and 2004, based on 3 different EPO tracing parameters, which establish that a certain number of anonymous samples carry EPO traces. The resulting court case ruled that the urine samples had been improperly handled and tested, and Lance lived to race another day.
The questions have continued, the suspicion has continued, but the only other thing that's really continued, and I think is the most alarming thing, is the performance. I've not gone away. And I think sometimes you see athletes where they get a lot of attention, a lot of scrutiny, and the crush does come on, and the performance diminishes. And I'm proud to say that that's never happened with me.
Bouncing back from the persistent doping claims was a downhill ride compared to the mountain he'd had to climb back in 1996 when he was diagnosed with testicular cancer.
And showed me the ultrasounds and the other x-rays and said we had a problem. And of course, I just, what everybody does, I was in denial. I thought this can't be, because I'm 25 years old, I'm one of the best in my sport, and why would I have cancer?
The disease had spread to his brain and lungs, and doctors gave him less than a 50% chance of survival before committing him to a brutal regime of surgery and chemotherapy. It provided him with a supreme test of his battling spirit. Not only did he beat the doctors' odds to survive, he ended up winning the toughest road race in the world less than 3 years later. In July 2004, after repeating the phenomenal feat 4 more years in a row, he looked on track to secure his 6th straight Tour.
He's a great sportsman, of course, very strong, very dominant. It's not easy to win the Tour 5 times, and it will be 6 times, yeah. It's a strong man, of course.
He'd become such a dead cert that hundreds of American fans had made the trip to Lons-le-Saunier to cheer him home.
Lance is gonna win. Yes? Yeah, I'm positive. I guarantee it.
We're rooting for him. We hope he goes for his 6th victory.
Great guy, survives cancer. A hero, American hero. We love Lance Armstrong.
He's prepared, he's physically fit, nutritionally fit, psychologically. I think everything's fine. He's got a great team. So he can't lose. He's not alone. He's got a great team that's working for him. So he can't really lose.
Even comedian Robin Williams had rolled in for a look-see.
My feeling about Lance is extraordinary. It's like, je crois que la 6e fois, merci Dieu, c'est la gagner le maillot jaune en Paris. I'm here especially for him, and for l'équipe postale aussi. Pour l'équipe postale, c'est le train de grande vitesse postale. Au revoir, soyez sains, soyez secs maintenant alors.
Lance duly obliged, breaking the record of 5 wins which he'd shared with 4 other riders. Having defied ridiculous odds on countless occasions to claim such a lofty place in cycling history, no one was betting against him going one better the following year. Aside from putting even more distance between him and his nearest rival in the record books, his 7th victory also brought with it a poignant reminder of the hard race he'd ridden to get there. Before beginning his chemotherapy back in 1996, the doctors had advised him to bank some of his sperm if he had any hopes of having kids. He'd taken their advice, and 9 years later, on the eve of his retirement, his 3 children accompanied him to the podium.
First and foremost, I think the biggest inspiration in my life now and the biggest inspiration in this decision is my children. They're the ones that make it easier to suffer, but they're also the ones that have told me that it's time to come home.
And surely he'd earned the right to put his feet up. By the age of 34, he'd won every media award going, and it was time to concentrate on his personal life. As well as setting up the Lance Armstrong Foundation to support people affected by cancer, he ploughed plenty of energy into high-profile romances with Sheryl Crow, Ashley Olsen and Kate Hudson. Finally, in 2008, after doctors predicted he would never be able to father children naturally, he announced his latest girlfriend was pregnant. True to Lance Armstrong form, however, that wasn't the only piece of odds-defying news. On the 9th of September 2008, he declared that he would be making a return to pro cycling, with the express goal of winning the 2009 Tour de France. Joan Rivers began badgering audiences way back in the 1960s. After performing in numerous stand-up comedy clubs, she began making appearances on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Her brash Brooklyn bark provided the perfect complement to the below-the-belt humour that left no one out of the firing line. Catty gags like, "Is Elizabeth Taylor fat? Her favourite food is seconds," were balanced out with pokes at herself like, "I've got flabby thighs, but fortunately my stomach covers them." "Can we talk?" became her catchphrase, and her endless stock of low blows kept her in business as a top comic until the late 80s. By then, her addiction to plastic surgery had turned her into her own caricature, and it appeared she'd taken the self-parody as far as it could go. She sank to the depths of despair in 1987 when her husband and producer, Edgar Rosenberg, committed suicide. In one fell swoop, she'd lost her companion of 22 years and the use of her trademark bored husband jokes. According to her autobiography, Bouncing Back, she then developed bulimia and entertained her own thoughts of suicide. After that, Joan's stand-up career gave way to a sit-down career as a daytime talk show host. However, she did get back on her feet with help from her daughter Melissa, hosting pre-award show for E! Entertainment, which involved hanging around on red carpets and harassing passing celebrities.
We are the critics of the show, and we never can forget. We are there to do the show for the people watching at home. It is not about the people that you interview making chit-chat with them. It's about saying what you think for the people at home to agree or disagree with you.
Clearly taking her job as a fashion critic very seriously, she adopted a strict regime ahead of the Golden Globes.
Well, I like to gain weight, so I represent the fatties at home. So I think it's very important. I have to force feed myself 10 to 12 extra meals a day. No, you starve and you try to look good in the fit. Melissa had her fittings last night.
And I have to have more on Saturday because it wasn't working.
The mother and daughter act gathered momentum, and by 2005, they graduated to the Oscars.
This is the big award show. So there's, the Golden Globes, everyone's drinking, they're having a great time. The Oscars are the Oscars, and everybody treats it accordingly. It's like going to grandfather's house, your rich grandfather's house, for dinner, and they're going to discuss whether or not you're in the will.
Together, they've been able to meet the challenges of working with tricky A-listers.
Oh, Tommy Lee Jones, who just grunts. The usual ones. Who else, Melissa? That I'm just thinking.
It's whoever it becomes a chore to.
Yeah.
If it's a chore, don't come down the red carpet. That's fun. I mean, that's the thing is, most of the people, and you know this, I would say a good 90% are actually having a good time with it. And it's that 10% that it's such a painful chore to that it just dampens your whole evening.
Russell Crowe.
You know, it's...
Not that Joan is easily impressed.
Sometimes you meet an A-lister and they're like a little person.
Having proved she was still sharp-witted enough to mix it with the cream of Hollywood, she decided it was high time to remind the world that she was an A-lister in her own right. In 2009, at the grand old age of 75, she set off on her work in progress by a life in progress world tour.
Most importantly, what are you guys going to be wearing on the carpet?
I wish I knew.
I'm going naked.
No, I have my first fitting tomorrow.
She's going to. I've gotten mine is a Pamela Dennis dress, and it's very, very, very pretty. It's very, very pretty. It's not very, very, very pretty. It's very, very pretty. I'm getting it free. It's okay. Sucks.
It's perhaps hard to believe that the television series Star Trek only ran from 1966 to 1969. But somewhere along the intergalactic highway, the identity of actor and novelist William Shatner became irrevocably fused with that of his Starship Commander alter ego, Captain James T. Kirk.
I had to take an MRI the other day, and you know what an MRI is? You go into those little thing and you're encapsulated, and I'm somewhat claustrophobic, and I'm thinking I gotta talk myself down. I can't scream. Captain Kirk can't scream. Get me out of here! I couldn't do that. And then the guy running the MRI machine came up to me and said, "I'm your biggest fan."
Was it the dorky sound effects, the tight sweaters, the pointy ears, the polystyrene rocks, or Lieutenant Uhuru's cleavage that turned the low-rent sci-fi saga into a cult hit? Or was it the scriptwriter's decision to boldly go where no TV show had gone before?
The acting was fun. I had some fun things to do as an actor.
Like, can you give us an example?
Oh, double roles. There was one where the girl entered my body. There were weird things to do that nobody else had to do ever before.
Perhaps it was the chemistry between Captain Kirk and his trusty 2IC and science officer, Mr. Spock, which was clearly still bubbling away 40 years later.
I first met Bill several years after Star Trek went on the air.
That's a funny line. You're here. We're talking about Star Trek for 40 years, and that's the first time he said that.
We were too busy making the shows to meet. We didn't meet, you know.
He would go into makeup early in the morning, and I'd arrive jauntily hours later, and then have to drag him. You know, by 3 hours of makeup, he was exhausted. The rest of the day, I had to drag him.
He'd carry me the rest of the day.
Literally.
And I'd say to him, who are you? What's your name? And he didn't.
I had to introduce myself by the third year.
He kept saying, well,
"This is frickin' frack. We do this routine."
Sadly, however, while dedicated Trekkies got to lap up the series reruns throughout the 1970s, William was doing it tough. After his wife walked out on him, the Canadian actor had to resort to doing television commercials for a supermarket chain and became an occasional guest on game shows.
Until now.
At his lowest point, he lived in a truck bed camper in the San Fernando Valley, taking on odd jobs and making appearances at parties. The wilderness years ended in 1979, when, under pressure from loyal fans of the series, he was hired by Paramount to star in Star Trek: The Motion Picture. With a promotion to Admiral, he was back in the big chair and cruising at warp speed. He's never forgotten the die-hard Trekkies who supported him.
What do I think of the Trekkies? I love each and every one of them. They're wonderful.
Having been given a reprieve, he hung tightly to the controls, starring in another 5 Star Trek films, one of which he directed himself. During the 80s, he also made a return to television as veteran police officer T.J. Hooker. His other ventures have included releasing recordings of his recitations of famous songs like Mr. Tambourine Man, backed by psychedelic orchestral arrangements. He's also released a series of sci-fi novels, which he may or may not have written himself. For all his success and talents, however, It's probably fair to say that few people really took him seriously until he landed the part of oddball attorney Denny Crane in the final series of primetime legal drama The Practice in 2004. After all those years of hamming it up in space, he took out an Emmy for supporting actor in a drama series.
What I was dreading was the disappointment of losing. I'd rather not be nominated. I don't really know whether I mean that or not. But you want the nomination, and then once you get the nomination, you want to win. But what you don't want is the, oh gosh, I lost. And so you have a 20% chance of winning, I guess. And the thrill is unbounded.
At the age of 64, he'd finally become part of the establishment and followed up by winning a Golden Globe and a second Emmy for his work in the spin-off hit Boston Legal. But he still wasn't giving away his day job as guest star at the endless round of Star Trek exhibitions and conventions, not to mention Star Trek The Tour.
40 years later, watch what happens when I press this button. Nothing's just exactly the way it was.
Like you back home?
Just like back home.
Rather than comeback kid, Ozzy Osbourne would more accurately be described as the King of Resurrection. Dubbed the Prince of Darkness early on in his hard-rocking career, he steered Black Sabbath through their platinum-selling heyday of the 1970s, before finding himself out on his own, suffering from depression and addictions to a mixed bag of intoxicating substances. He bounced back from that black spot with the help of his former manager's daughter and future wife, Sharon Arden, and achieved solo success with albums like Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman. After more problems with drink and drugs, he looked ready to bow out again. But his retirement in 1995 was followed by an immediate comeback tour and the launch of his wildly successful annual Ozfest, which also saw his brief reunion with Black Sabbath. Just when his solo career finally looked to be tapering off in 2001, Sharon snared the whole family a deal to be just themselves in the MTV smash hit, The Osbournes. All the resulting attention left Ozzy scratching his head. But over the next few years, he was invited to dine with the president, awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and declared a living legend at the 2008 Classic Rock Awards.
I don't know about the living legend bit. I'm glad I'm alive to receive the award because my lifestyle went crazy for a long while, you know. I mean, I quite enjoy not drinking or getting messed up anymore. I'm not saying I'm a prude or anything, but I kind of remember what I did yesterday.
On the eve of his 60th birthday in December 2008, he could remember all the way back to his first hit with Black Sabbath.
So I remember being in a club in Birmingham, and Jim Simpson, the then manager, local guy, said to me, "Oh, your album goes in the charts next week, it's 17, I think." I thought he was pulling my leg, and I said, "You know, you're joking." And we had no idea.
He also hadn't forgotten that his status as a living legend rather than a dead one owed a lot to his other half.
If you want me to be manager, you've got to start cleaning your act up, and well, I did for a while, but then I went back out, and she stuck by me through it all. And this is a dedication to my wife, Sharon. She's wonderful. The best thing that's ever happened to me in my life. I love her.